But yes, welcome in everyone. I'll kind of let everybody get in and get settled. But if this is your first time joining one of our IT Leadership Lab live streams, welcome in. This is a community dedicated to IT leaders. It's here for you to share content, for you to learn from peers, build community, things like that. Great example is Clark posted something this morning and got a lot of really good feedback from other people within the industry. So just kind of a great example of how this community works. And then we also have bi-monthly webinars where we discuss various IT leadership topics, whether they're tech related or not tech related, and then actually bring on leaders within the space that can share their expertise and talk a little bit about those kinds of things that you might be experiencing in your day-to-day or workflows that you need to work through, things like that. So I'm excited to bring on Clark today to talk about incident response. And I am going to go ahead and just pass it on to Clark. If you want to introduce yourself, talk a little bit about your journey in IT and what you're doing now. Oh, you're muted, I think.
Yep. Sorry, I was muted.
Oh, good.
I wanted to thank you and the community. Like, this is a wonderful community. It's great work that you're doing here. And, I was surprised and overwhelmed by the response from my question this morning, which thank you to everybody. I mean, it's very helpful because, when as leaders, we're kind of sitting alone out here sometimes and you need a sounding board, and this is a great place to do it. So thank you. And thank you for having me today. So my name is Clark Sandlin. I am the CEO and president of Zerka. We are a managed IT service provider for private equity, hedge funds, and family offices located in the Dallas area. I've had this business for 21 years. Prior to that, I worked for a private equity group, a very large international private equity group, who then approached me in this business as every different directions, all the investors and partners and so on and so forth. '80s with a Commodore 64, and I think I dropped. So tech is in my blood, and this is what I've been doing for my entire career.
Well, that's awesome. I'm really glad that you could be on, and I think you have a lot of interesting experience and background, especially working as an MSP and working with a lot of customers and probably developing plenty of incident response plans and things like that. So I think this will be kind of a great topic. So we can kind of jump into it. And I wanted to start the discussion just by asking, and we covered it a little bit last time before we cut out. I know that your situation is a little bit different as an MSP, but do you have a clearly defined incident response team? Are there people that are dedicated to that actual practice and kind of leading those processes?
Yes. So as an MSP, we do have defined roles. Of course, a lot of our team members wear multiple hats, but when an incident happens, everybody puts on that incident response hat. So you have your senior techs, your tier 1, 2, and 3, and they all kind of fall into those roles when there's a rather large incident or a critical incident, if you will. I have worked in large companies before, where we've had teams like this, response teams. It wasn't as formalized, but we did have a dedicated person for response. So I've been kind of all around, and I understand, how it affects a big business versus how it affects a smaller business, because most of our clients are anywhere from, 25 people up to 350 people per client. And even the smaller ones, you still have to have an incident response plan for.
Yeah. Does the Does the plan change based on the size of the company? Like, obviously, the impact might be different, but does the size of
Yeah,
the company, like, change how you approach, these kinds of, incident responses?
for sure. If it's like a 15 to 20 person office, it's not going to be the same as, a 350 plus office. The basic structure still there. You still have to have, okay, how long does it take to restore everything if it's a, complete outage situation, or what are you doing each scenario that you play out? Um, the skeleton is still there for, all the things that you need to run through. But yeah, it's definitely a smaller scale.
Mhm. And how often are y'all usually reevaluating the incident response plans?
So most of our clients are SEC regulated, so we fall in under GDPR and NIST. Those are the types of frameworks. So we have to revisit this on an annual basis. It's mandated for us. However, um, anytime we use this, we have to call our response template. We revisit it every single time. So after we've engaged our incident response plan, as one of the lessons learned, we go back and refine it or add things to it that, you know, oh, we should have had this on there.
Mhm.
So it's definitely at the lessons learned part. So we revisit it every time it's used, which, is not, fortunately, not too frequently, but it does happen throughout the year.
Yeah. What roles usually are included in that, both setting up the incident response plan and then also if an incident happens, who is kind of involved in that process?
Yeah. So this is kind of, I am sure everybody being in IT here, they understand, the boss who's hanging over your shoulder. What's up? Is it done? Is it work? Is it up yet? Is it up yet? Is it up yet? Is it up yet? And you're just like, dude, I'm trying to work on this. I'm trying to get it fixed for you. So, this is why an incident response plan team is very important, because you have to have a chain of communication and you need someone separated from the actual tech or the programmer performing the remediation on the incident. Um, so, usually that falls on the CIO, the CISO, whoever that C-suite in the IT department is, or even a operations manager, to to coordinate that communication. But the communication definitely needs to happen to the C-suite, obviously, because usually they're the ones, pounding on the door, on the server room door, saying, "Is it back up yet? When can we expect it to be back up yet?" So that's really the most important thing, is the communication aspect of it in real time, because you know in most of these incidents, you don't really know exactly how long it's going to take to get it back up. Sometimes you do, if it's like a backup restore or things like that, or you're getting hardware back up. But if it's a little bit more complex and it's a coding issue, then you really don't have a timeline, and that's where that communication is very important.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. So when we're talking about monitoring for incidents, what kind of tools or monitoring systems do you use to detect incidents before they become a full blown outage? Um, and how do you kind of read through those, or how does your team read through those to distinguish between normal system noise and then an actual incident um, that needs to be remediated?
Alert fatigue for sure. Yeah, so as an MSP, we have so many tools that we use. How we do it for our clients is we give them a la carte services, and they can select which tools. We do have a baseline, of course. Ninja One is our baseline for monitoring and management, and we have a lot of automation that we've customized and built in to there, as far as connectivity tests, making sure things are up and running, responding to system outages and things like that. And then we also have a MDR EDR system that we use for cybersecurity threats or endpoint detection and response, managed detection and response. Um, we have a SOC, if you will. So we have so many tools and teams that are monitoring on a regular basis, and we have the what we respond to and how the priority that we respond to. And when an incident is called, then we pull up our policy and run through it really quickly. We have a ticket for that, basically.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's really helpful to have kind of a template in place.
Hmm.
Um, and you mentioned prioritization, and something that I had shared last week was an incident, like building an incident response matrix. Is that something that y'all have that kind of helps you prioritize the different incidents, kind of based on impact or things like that?
Yes, actually, you shared one. I think it was last year,
Oh,
and
yeah, yeah.
we responded that and incorporated it into ours. And I added a few things to it and put it back into the leadership lab. Um, and yeah, that's what we're using. So we do have, okay, if just one person calls in and says, "Oh, the internet's down," screaming, yelling, it's down for everybody. So of course we have, you know, our troubleshooting initially to just validate that that's actually the case. But typically we already know it's not because we received alerts from Ninja One.
Mhm.
But yeah, we do have just like we qualify incoming calls like severity. There is a severity for the incident to initiate the incident response plan, which it's got to be in the red on your chart that you shared.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, glad to know that one of the templates I posted was helpful. I mean, I didn't create it, but there are a lot of really good things out there.
Sure.
Um, yeah. So, what is your kind of standard process once an incident is identified? And definitely feel free if, like, as we're going over any of these, if it would help to share your screen and actually show like the templates that you had shared. Definitely
Oh,
feel
sure.
free. Um, but I'm just curious about once you actually identify an incident using whatever tool you use, what is the kind of process in kind of remediating that and recovering from it?
Yeah. So every process is different. So we have an incident response plan that is basically the policy and procedure for any incident, and then that plan calls out the sub templates, if you will. So, and I published some of these as well within the past 2 weeks. And the sub templates are things like cybersecurity breach, phishing, and now we have an AI one as well. So, an AI breach that we've included. Um, so really, we kind of assess it based on somebody. If somebody calls in and they say, "Okay, I clicked on this link and I gave my credentials," or if they fess up, then of course that calls the phishing template. Or if there's a DLP, is like if Purview is issuing a DLP alerts left and right for us, then that calls another one. That's a breach template, and each one has a different thing a different set of checklists to follow, and you have to go down that list. And it's also got the communication chain on it as well. So
Mhm.
these things are really important because when an emergency hits, there's no time to think. You just have to you
Yes.
need a reminder, a constant reminder. Oh yeah, I got to do this next. Oh yeah, I got to do this next.
Hmm. Yeah, I live by a list, so I I can imagine that having something on hand like that would be incredibly helpful.
Yeah, I do because I've shared those before. So let me share an example here if I can
Yeah, that would be
find
great.
it real quick. I have the newly created AI template. Let's see. Here it is. Okay. Uh-oh. Of course I can't pull it up. Hold on one second.
If you want, I can also pull it up if that would help.
Yeah, because it's on the IT Leadership Lab. I think I changed the link for it. So, yeah.
Let's see.
Operations. Let's see. Yep. And my screen's probably too big to share. Hold on one second.
All good.
Okay, I think I got it. Okay, so
Perfect.
there you go. So this is the incident response template for an AI breach, which we haven't really used this one yet, but we've used a variation on it. Which I can discuss at the end of it. But you can see how you've got a summary of the incident, and then you've got the threat escalation protocol information, which this is the one I took from yours that you shared last year. You have the tier, the impact, the scope, high, medium, low, and then the response accordingly. So the response would be to stop the AI agent. So you have your response procedures here where you walk through this and you follow the chain going back to the incident response plan. And then you have your containment procedure. So how are we going to contain the threat? We've stopped it. Now, how do we contain it? And then how do we remediate it? So you kind of go back through all of these steps. And then, of course, the notification procedures as you go through, which are probably the most important. You have to communicate through your chain. And, you have to define what happened. And then you have the timeline for response. And this gets into the summary part, which probably this is the most important part here, because what you're doing here is you're communicating to the higher ups, the C level, the IT managers, that these are the problems and this is what happened, and these are where the potential gaps and risks are, and what is missing within our process, and what corrective actions we need to take. So I did this a couple of weeks ago with a client who decided to just go crazy with AI in their environment. They're a global admin, so they started making all kinds of changes and opened up the application to their environment. Well, that we perceive as a risk, and we perceive it as a high critical risk. So we created one of these. We didn't really call it an incident because there was no incident yet, but we did call it a risk. We've called it a risk. And we sent this over to them and said, these are where you're opening your environment up, and this is a huge risk which could lead to an incident. So I'll share that one sometime in the near future as well, because it's not really an incident because it hadn't happened yet, but it is a preventative incident response plan. And the customer came back and eventually just took away the app that they registered into 365. So it was very, very fruitful, and it was a good exercise to go through. And I think when you document things like this, you get people's attention better than you would if you just sent an email, a Teams message, or a text or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So whenever you actually deal with an incident and you have to utilize a template like this, how do you make sure that, one, everything is documented in a place that is easily accessible for everybody on your team, but also any stakeholders, both for this incident and for others? And then also, how do you make sure that your team and customers and stuff are actually taking what was learned and putting it into practice?
Yeah, so that's the practice part gets tricky, but how we handle this is we have all of these templates in our ticketing system. And when an incident is reported, usually it comes in as a ticket, and then we can we add the appropriate template to that ticket. So whether it's a phishing event, whether it's a cybersecurity breach or an AI breach, or whatever list of possible outcomes it could be, or it's an alert that was triggered, we will copy that template into the ticket, and then from there, the level 1 tech fills out the first part, which is basically what happened, how did we stop it, and then they pass that up to the chain, level 2, level 3, and then it gets filled out from there once we do our diligence and researching. And then finally, the most senior tech will summarize the document, point out where the risks were, why there were risks, why did this happen, was there something that could have been instituted to prevent this? Is there a tool or something that was overlooked previously on a budget, which is quite often the case? So that this gives you the opportunity to then spit this back to the C-level and say, listen, if we would have had this product or this tool in place, it would have prevented this incident. For us, we manage multiple clients, so we get a wide range of responses. Some we get responses right away saying, hey, we've got to fix this right away. Tell me what it's going to cost to bring these tools in this environment. Or we get some that just ignore it. We try and follow up. So we do QBRs with our clients. We sit down and go through it, and we'll bring these up because we'll have the whole chain during that conversation, and we'll discuss it and say, hey, do you have any questions about this incident that happened?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So it's a conversation starter. Really, these templates are really more about getting that conversation moving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what is your strategy for kind of constant communication? Like, how do you decide what is too much, what is enough, and how do you disseminate this information out to people?
You mean during the incident or after?
Both. I guess both.
Okay.
Yeah.
So during the incident, it's really, as I mentioned earlier, it's frustrating for the tech or the programmer involved because they're trying to remediate the issue, whether it's contain the issue or resolve the issue right away.
Oh, you might. I think you might have frozen.
They can focus on their job. And then let's see. The once all of that's completed, the frequency is kind of dictated by the policy. So each time you find a particular incident or something comes up, you're going to communicate that as you go.
Yeah.
But then once it's all wrapped up, generally the C-suite is then you produce this document, and it's a lot of information. You don't want to write a book. It shouldn't be any longer than maybe 2 or 3 pages. If it's longer than that, you need an executive summary that highlights the key points. But this is, it's very good research and information that the decision makers, the budget, the CFO, the CIO and the CEO need to have this information when making decisions about future budgets, or if this is something they need to implement right away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was I had a kind of a question about, you were talking about putting some sort of executive summary. How do you try to avoid getting too in the weeds with, like, technically with a lot of these issues, when you're talking to people that maybe aren't as technically inclined? What are the things that you do to kind of distill that information down to something that is the things that they need to know, as opposed to a really technical?
Yeah, so like I guess like in Office Space, we have that guy who can talk to the techs and then talk to the customers, right? So usually at the senior level, that those guys are a little bit more, they have more experience with, working with the C-level, the middle management, and they distill it down for everybody. You still have to have the technical information because it's very important, because you do have, everybody's different. You might have a CEO who's very involved and wants to know everything, is going to put everything in chat GPT and say, well, tell me what this report says, even though they shouldn't be doing that. But that's, here to that. That's another then you also have CEOs who don't really care. They'll look at it and go, oh, great, we got our process in place. It's working. So everybody's different with the way they respond. So you have to give that depth. You have to have that detail for those CEOs, CFOs, whoever, who do dive into that detail and do question, because they really are trying to get to the bottom of the issue. So, generally you figured out who's your target audience at that point. So you're going to write or craft that executive summary accordingly.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Do you still, like Tim said, putting technical information in 9-point font at the bottom of the email has gotten me a lot of kudos. Is that something something similar to what you do, where you're like, here's what you need to know, but if you're curious, I guess here's all of the technical jargon?
That's a very good point, Tim. And I've done that before. It just, generally, who you're talking to, who your audience is, if your CEO is going to really want to see that information. You also know if your CEO wants to know that information is there, but isn't going to read it, or your CEO is going to read every last bit of that email, or that report. So really, a lot of it comes down to who's your target audience. And I learned this in, professional communication, technical writing in college, and is just know your audience. And it's always the same. You have to meet them where they're at. And that's really important. So, I have some CEOs at clients of ours that they just want to know the bottom line. How, what can we do to prevent this in the future? And that's about it. But then you have others that I want to see the full report.
Yeah. So are there any, I know with kind of the industries you work with, are there any specific compliance frameworks or regulatory frameworks that you have to personally work within when it comes to incident response? And how does that kind of change? How does that kind of change a process?
Yeah. So we use NIST and GDPR as the frameworks for most of our clients, because, private equity, whether it's United States or Europe, we've done a lot of HIPAA compliance. So we've done PCI, HIPAA, all kinds of other frameworks that we have to adhere to. And there's different responses for each. So you kind of have to tweak your incident response plan accordingly. A lot of them are very similar. They have all the same kind of, vanilla, bones in them. But then some of them are going to have more stringent requirements. Like ITAR is probably the most stringent one we've ever worked with, which is, for military and government contractors, and, for international exchange and things like that. So, it does vary, and you do need to customize that policy according to that framework. One nice thing about Microsoft, which I can't believe I'm saying something nice about Microsoft, but Purview has all these templates built in that are great. You can basically go in and pull up the NIST template, and, right then you can spit it out to an Excel spreadsheet, and it has everything that you need to comply to and adhere to. And you can also enforce that from Purview, which is nice as well.
I'm grabbing a couple of links to drop in the chat of things that you're mentioning, just in case anybody is interested in them.
There's so much out there.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of tools, and I think that's something that is also a struggle. Is there's so many things out there that it's kind of hard to know exactly where to start. So I guess that leads me to another question, which is, if someone doesn't have an incident response plan, how do they even get started? Do they get started with one of these templates? Who should they involve in that conversation whenever they're getting something spun up like that? What would that look like for somebody that's kind of starting from ground zero?
Yeah, so definitely start with a template and, customize that towards your team, customize it towards the target audience. If you're an IT manager for a single company, your target audience and you know what they're expecting as far as reports. So you can tailor that template accordingly. And then do some tabletop exercises, kind of run through some scenarios with your team and I would include the entire IT team. And I would also include department heads as well for those tabletop exercises. So you approach them and say, listen, what are we going to do in the case of a fire? What are we going to do in the case of, internet outage? What are we going to do in the case of a hardware, a critical system hardware failure? And then usually that calls your disaster recovery plan, your business continuity plan. Usually fire, everybody's out of the building or whatever. But then how do you restore and get back up and running from there? If you have on-prem servers, so you define the environment and you include all your inventories and all of that in with your incident response plan documentation.
Okay, cool. And how often would you suggest people run those tabletop scenarios?
At the very least, for smaller teams, I do it once a year, or based on what the requirement is from the regulatory advisor or your compliance requirements. If you have the luxury, I'd do it twice a year. But then also, each time an incident comes up, that's a perfect opportunity to revise your templates and your response plan and have that, kind of revisit that exercise with your entire team, your IT team, and your management team.
Mm-hmm. And how do you measure the performance or effectiveness of the drills? Especially because, afterwards, you're probably going to have some sort of postmortem on how something was handled. So, how do
Yeah.
you communicate that and measure that impact?
So usually all that information is in the ticket. So the text will document all that in the ticket. We'll have some people that make notes of, hey, we need to add this to the template in the future as they're going through the actual incident. And then that's when we have that post-mortem meeting, that's when we kind of go through this, and then we assign somebody who's going to update the template at that point. And we keep version numbers of the templates.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So you would recommend having somebody that is kind of dedicated to keeping track of that kind of stuff?
Yes.
Yeah.
And even if you have smaller teams, you just, put the hat on one person. Usually there's somebody who likes to do documentation or manage documentation. It's not everybody, but, some people do. And, they want to take that on, offer it out to your IT team, and you'll find somebody who, yes, I want to take this on. This is going to be my responsibility.
Yeah. I mean, I'm personally that person on my team. So I love documentation. It's easy for me to wrap my mind around. It's easy for me to go, yes, we just take this and get it organized so that we can disseminate it out to people. And so it's something that kind of fits my brain. And so
Sure.
I'm always eager to take on those. So hopefully there are people in y'all's IT teams that are also eager for.
Yeah, as you can tell, I love to do it too. So I love to document everything. So, and it comes, it's just nature, second nature to me. So, it's communication.
Yeah, you probably wouldn't know it by looking at my house, but I like to be organized. But I like to be digitally organized, but maybe the physical organization isn't as good as it should be.
Yeah. I think I can hang with you there too.
Yeah, it's tough to be organized in every way. And then you mentioned that getting other stakeholders throughout the company involved in these tabletop scenarios. What departments usually do you reach out to? Because I don't think it would be every single department in like an internal IT organization, but what are some of those that need to be involved? Like legal is probably a great example of a team that needs to be involved.
Yeah, so I'm probably not the norm, but I would definitely involve every single department. And the reason is because when incidents happen, you know, everybody's kind of deer in the headlights. Oh my goodness, what happened? Or, what do we do? But if you're constantly educating everyone, including every single department, all the way down to the janitorial staff,
Mm,
um, you know, bringing them in, not only empowering, it's also, gives them visibility to what's actually going to happen. That we do have a plan, that there is steps that we will follow in every single incident that we've can come up with. From our perspective as IT, it's going to be systems. It's going to be how do we respond if a major cyber attack or things like that. Then what happens, and then you have the you walk through the remediation. But it's good to communicate this out to all the departments as well, because everybody wants to know what's going on,
mhm.
and everyone wants to know what the timeline is. And if you do these tabletop exercises with every single department, they get in that cadence, that habit of, I know I remember us discussing this,
Mhm.
when the actual emergency hits. And
Yeah.
then they'll kind of fall into that, now I know what they're doing. Okay, now I know what we're doing.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's similar to one of the topics we had discussed a while back, which was training end users on cybersecurity and
Yeah.
keeping them safe. And I think a great example is we personally at Ninja do these like uh, phishing tests where
Yeah.
our IT department will send out, fake phishing emails. We'll report it. We get free internet points. It's great. Well, this morning I saw something and I went, "Oh, they're trying to get me again," and I reported it, and it was an actual phishing email,
Oh,
and
wow.
it was like, "Oh, this is getting me in the habit of recognizing these signs," and so it's like, you know, if I were to actually click on that, it would have been probably pretty bad. Uh,
Sure.
and I think it's the same thing with this, where, once they're in the habit of knowing about these incidents, um, they know more naturally how to handle them.
Right. And they know how their other teams are going to handle them too. And
Mhm,
what everybody's role in it is. Because, even if it's like uh a complete IT systems outage, you want your CEO to communicate accordingly to the entire company.
mhm,
You need to have that, instead of him or her coming to you and saying, "Hey, what do we do? How long is it going to take?" No, there's a chain that gets kicked off, a task list that gets kicked off, and that communication happens immediately. Um, whether it's through, if the email system's down, then you can't do that. You do it through text, so you have all these backup systems. And that's your disaster recovery plan, and your disaster recovery plan, which is separate from this, lists how you're going to communicate if systems are out, how, whether it's email, text, Teams, whatever options you have available, Meshtastic, whatever off grid kind of stuff, all the way down to that, because we have that as well for our team. We have, you know, uh, backup systems that we can use. We even have walkie talkies and ham radios. So that's why I'm into that stuff. Uh, because if everything's out, then we need to mobilize our team as well.
mhm,
Um, but that's part of that disaster recovery plan that gets called.
mhm. Yeah. Well, those are all the questions I had. I wanted to see if you had any other, tips or things that maybe I didn't ask about or things that I didn't cover, um, or even anything that you wanted to share uh, about disaster or incident responses and disaster recovery and things like that.
Yeah, so the tabletop exercises are very, very important, but you also mentioned phishing simulation. So phishing simulation is another thing to test. You have a so whether it's quarterly or biannually or annually or whatever your established program is, then the phishing sim, even though you're causing it, it's a phishing simulation. You still need to have an incident response plan for that. And we do kind of a twos that we're doing a phishing sim. We're testing ourselves internally as well. So typically what happens is either a customer will find it and forward it to a help desk, or even looking for in that phishing sim. And then we kick that off. So we kick that off and fill out the incident response template for phishing, and then report that back to everybody who needs to know, whether it's C-level or usually it's the internal IT department. But then we revisit that in the quarter, the QBR, and say, well, this many people clicked on this phishing link, and this is a potential risk. Here's how we could potentially address this. Either send them to training, and or maybe we kind of put these people in a sandbox and maybe give them a little bit more restricted access to things, depending on how often they click. We've had an accountant, and I can't believe this, but they've wired so many times, like multiple times, and I can't believe they still have a job, but they do, in accounting, and they continue to wire to, fraudulent accounts and things like that. So no matter how, I couldn't believe it. I mean, eventually, we've done phishing training. We sent them to phishing training. We've done, all kinds of training for these people, and we've done phishing sims, and every time they bite the phishing sim, and it's just a huge risk. And I get it. Some of our oil and gas clients have so many vendors. They're a huge target because they have so many third-party vendors that potentially expose them as well. And there's wires going out everywhere. So, but still, at some point, you got to depend on your accountant. So there's a lot of fruit you can develop from a phishing sim. You can also do pen testing, of course. Mm-hmm. And when you do pen testing, you correspond that to your cybersecurity breach template. So you try and break into the environment. You see what systems you can, potentially break. Then we have a social engineering one, which we do probably every 2 years or something. We try and send somebody in dressed up in a UPS outfit, and then see if they can walk around the office or, gain access to the systems and plug in some Hack5 utilities and see, capture the flag kind of thing. Yeah. And then we'll write a report on that too. So those are fun exercises as well. We also call and say, hey, not somebody from the help desk. We usually get a salesperson, and we have them call and try and get a password from somebody. We make sure it's somebody they don't know, but we try and get them to on the phone and say, hey, I'm from the IT department. And, right there, they don't have an IT department because it's outsourced. But, but some people don't know. And you'd be amazed how much they'll cough that password up. So, that also, you create an incident report for that, even though you created that. So, because you're communicating, the whole idea is to communicate to management, hey, here's where your gaps are, here's where your risks are. And usually training is the most important part of all of this. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, those are some of the kind of the supplemental things, and that's really turns into be a tabletop exercise in and of itself. And you keep refining, developing that document, and until you've got a well-oiled machine. When you talk about the companies that don't have this in place, it's just get started. It doesn't matter. Even if you just have a notepad, checklist, start there. It's better than anything. And then the next time you'll just keep refining it, and this document will be better and better and better as you develop it over time. but like I said, it's, you do have, well, like Nate echoes, you do have to have business continuity and disaster recovery plans in place. Those are really most important things. The recovery time objectives and recovery point objectives. How long it takes to get to recover to that. Usually, those are going to be defined in those separate documents, not in your incident response plan, but your incident response plan should call all of these other documents in the pertinent scenarios. But really, I think my big takeaway for all of this is, this is the most important part of what we do, and not too many IT departments do this. And I get it, because a lot of us are, so overwhelmed and overworked and have so much going on. But the reason this is the most important thing is, as I mentioned earlier, it is your channel to communicate, to the C-level, the C-suite level, or whoever's running the company, directly to the CEO, the president. This is your time to get their ear. And if you craft this document really well, and you can give the takeaways at the end, like, if we had this tool in place, this would have prevented this. Or if we had this software, or if we had this service, or if we had just one more person, we could have prevented this. And then the other most important part of these reports is the financial aspect, which, unfortunately, IT doesn't really have all the visibility to all the, the financial aspects of it. But that's where, when you include the other departments, that's where this becomes very important. When you include them as part of this whole incident response plan, they also can tell you, hey, this costs us this much. This costs my department this much being down for 5 hours, 6 hours, whatever. They'll do all the work for you. Mm-hmm. So by including them, by empowering them, they're doing the work for you. They're giving you the report, essentially, and then you communicate that to the decision maker or decision makers to help you get those budget line items, at the end of the year. So, that's all I could. That's what I can say about, having a very well defined incident response plan and the subsequent templates that support that. This is how you can grow your department, get where you need to be right sized, not undersized, or where you're overwhelmed constantly. And then couple that with tickets and say, okay, we've had 4 or 5 incidents this month, which is not normal. And if we had one more person, then we could become a little bit more proactive. So you have to define all that in the end, as far as the financial aspect of that. Mm-hmm. So that's, that's where I can say, those people who document and communicate, this is your time to shine, and this is where you can, really get some things moving. So, because most of the people you're communicating to here are all decision makers, and because you've taken the time to craft a long document with all the potential problems, all the remediation, all the steps you had to go through, and you've put the financial aspect to it, it makes their decision easier. Because if you're looking at it, you're going, well, wow, we could have saved $60,000 or $100,000 or whatever, which, if we were able to recover sooner, and heck, that's a salary for the IT department. Yeah. So if your uptime is more important than, having incidents throughout the year, then that's a problem. So the other aspect of this is, like, at the end of the year, when you're doing the budget, you pull up all of these reports that you've written through the course of the year, and you say, remember this? Remember this? This is how we can fix that. And I've had that save me a lot of unnecessary conversation or additional documentation when I get to discuss budget with most of our clients. Mm-hmm. And if you see things recurring, like like the accountant with the phishing, clicking on everything and giving away credentials all the time, that needs to be addressed one way, shape, or form. And that's when you have that big discussion, and that's usually when the big drivers in the budget come out, and yeah, we've got to address this because it's cost us this much all year long.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't emphasize the importance of this enough, and I know it's always on the back burner because usually as techs we're going from fire to fire, especially in an MSP. One client has a fire 1 hour and another one in the next hour. Things like that. You're jumping from fire to fire. But if you get to, if you make yourself, even though it's an additional hour or two to document all this and to write this up, this will definitely be fruitful by getting you to the point to where you hire more people. You're able to hire more people. You're able to bring in more resources. Your argument right here. So this is why this is very important to me.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Yeah, I think that you make a really good point. Is attaching it to budget and money is always, that is a language that I think most people speak, and so attaching it to that is definitely definitely a good idea.
Sure. And as I mentioned, I've been uploading these documents in the IT Leadership Lab. So, if anybody uses it or looks at it or, just has any feedback, please don't hesitate to, comment back. I'm always welcome for feedback. And the other thing is, I like creating this for our community, right? Because, not all of us have, the time or the opportunity to develop these kind of things, but it's nice to see someone who's pioneered the way or has already done this. And that's what I love about this community, is like the sharing aspect of this community and how everybody's, like this, like I go back to this morning when I posted, I really appreciate everybody's comments. I mean, it was so, I wasn't expecting that, that type of response, but it was great because we live in our office and we're kind of live in our head sometimes, and it's hard to get outside of that. It's nice to have a sounding board, and these documents are your sounding board. You can, here you go. Here's what somebody else is doing. Here's what somebody else is using. It's not all something that you're going to need. Maybe you can pare this down to one page. Maybe it's just too much, which is this is kind of geared towards larger organizations. But if you just had at least the bones of this document with your let me go back through here. If you have the bones of like the summary of the incident, of course, is kind of your executive summary, but then you have a response, and this is your same response every single time to this type of breach or outage or incident. And then you can keep adding to that list as breaches become more complex. Then you have your containment procedures. Like, these are the tried and true. So you don't have to keep reinventing the wheel. And if you especially on level 1, have a template they can turn to and say, oh, well, this has already been done. We're going to follow these steps until we can't, and then we escalate them further, right? So it also becomes kind of a training document internally that everyone can follow the task list and go through. So, and then you have your notification procedures and all of this. So every single document will have most of these bones, as I call them. And, like I said, you could pare this down to one page and it'd be, more than sufficient for a smaller group.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, and I think you made a great point that the lab is definitely meant for sharing. So definitely everyone should feel comfortable sharing whatever they have, because whatever they've got has helped them manage their organization. So yeah, I definitely am in full support of people kind of sharing their stuff. I try to share stuff, but it's not anything that I've personally used. So I think
good, because again, you did some research for me that I didn't have the time to do, and I pulled it up and I was like, oh wow, okay, this is cool, and that's what I incorporated into this document. So that's what's nice. You throw something out there, somebody can build on it, and you keep passing it around until wow, it's a great product.
Yeah, absolutely. We want IT leadership to not feel so isolated and want it to be more collaborative than anything.
Yeah, and it
So
does sometimes, and that's what, why it's really important to share those things and share those questions, and we're all here to help out. And the camaraderie is really kind of cool too, because it's like you feel like you're the only one, and you get all these responses. Hey, I'm doing that. I'm going through that too. Hey, I'm dealing with that too. I mean, I with every time Tim shares something, I'm like, oh wow, I'm not the only one. Okay, I don't feel so weird.
yeah,
Nate too, shares all kinds of really good information, which is, it's nice to know that these people are out there. It's nice to know that we're kind of building a community that does give us that feedback. And boy, I had some really good feedback this morning. So thank you all guys again. And please don't hesitate to give me feedback too on any of these documents that I'm sharing, because I want to make them good, and I want to, perfect them and keep sharing those within the community as well.
awesome. Well, I really appreciate all of your time this morning, Clark. I know that your schedule's pretty packed, so I'm glad that we were able to reschedule this. So thank you for everyone that was able to join again. And yeah, a lot of really, really great information. I linked to a bunch of the documents, all of the documents that Clark had mentioned, but you can also find them in the community. There's a whole section of blueprints, and so you can kind of find them all in there. But yeah, I think that's it for me, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks. What are we discussing? I've got too many events. I will be back next week with the developing talent live stream, which I think is going to be a really great conversation. So,
Oh yeah,
yeah,
for sure.
it'll be awesome. But yeah, in the meantime, I hope y'all have a good week, and we'll catch y'all next week.
All
All
right.
right.
Thanks.